Good evening, everybody, and thank you for coming out this Wednesday for the Housing and Environment Overview Committee. Just for clarity, we're still on the, this is before the 16th of May council briefing thing, so we're still on the old last year's committee members. Well, after the 16th, then other things, whatever people vote for. Right, the agenda tonight. The item 1 is fire evacuation, which yes, everybody here is familiar with it. There is no fire alarm plan, so if it does go off, it's genuine. So please vacate the building. Webcasting of meeting. It is webcast, I've just had it clarified and it is on as well, yes. Councillor Harvey.
Just for the record, can we clarify Councillor Sherlock's position? Because obviously being a Cabinet member up to this point, I take it he has resigned from Cabinet in order that he can sit on this committee. Just for the record, Chair.
For the record, I'll let him respond himself.
Yes, I resigned yesterday, and it's in writing, and it's been passed by monitors.
Yes, I can confirm that is all in order. Item 4, resignations and replacements. We welcome Councillor Paul Harvey in place of Councillor Gary Watts, Councillor Donald Sherlock in place of Councillor Sven Goddison, Councillor Graham Round in place of Councillor Ann Court. All of those were noted. Item 5, declaration of conflict of interest or whipping decisions. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think members may be aware, some members may be aware that my husband and I own a couple of properties that are out for rent. There are a few references within the paper, some minor references to landlords and the rental sector. So I've taken legal advice. The advice I've received is I can participate in the meeting, but should we get into a detailed discussion on landlords, rental property and so on, I would obviously absent myself, and if there was any specific voting attached to that particular subject, I couldn't participate in that, but I'm advised I'm free to actually participate in the vote on the main paper. Thank you, Chair.
Are there any other declarations of it?
Ditto, Mr. Chair.
That's noted.
Likewise, Mr. Chair.
Noted.
Ditto. I rent, but don't rent out.
Can I clarify with the officers? Can we note these? If what's necessary. Thank you. Someone here said. And Councillor James, and also myself. I rent in and rent out, so I'm on both sides, I suppose. Councillor Harvey.
Again, just to pick up Marion's point, as a tenant I don't have to declare anything, but I'll put it on the record. It's on the public record there.
Right, we seem to be short of people sleeping rough, but Donald's volunteering. I thank you for that. I think that's over half the committee have clarified some issues. Item 6, urgent items, there's nothing. Item 7, which is to confirm the minutes of the previous meeting, which is paper A, what we have in front of us. I've not been notified of any issues or changes on paper A. Can I take it as correct? Thank you. Seconded. Seconded. All those in favour? Thank you very much. That is the minutes sorted. Member and public participation. We have Councillor Golding. Oh, yes, we do. Yes, thank you. We have Councillor Golding here tonight, but I'm not aware of anybody else who wishes to speak, apart from those sat around this table. Standing invitation to relevant portfolio holder, that we've done under 8. Referrals from other committees, I'm not aware of any. This referred to the Cabinet, I'm not aware of any. So the main item is item 12, paper B, the Housing and Homeless Strategy for 2013 to 2018. This has been to the committee before. This is coming back, and we will go through paper B. And I'll hand over to the officer, Mrs. Randall.
Thank you. As you noted, Chair, this draft strategy has been to the committee before. It came to the committee in October last year when we had an extremely lengthy and detailed discussion about many of the components of that strategy. The committee at that time approved the recommended 5 themes within the strategy, but particularly asked to see the strategy again before it went on to Cabinet, to see the outcome of a broad consultation that it requested be undertaken on the draft strategy. And it also resolved that there should be an annual review of the strategy and also clear which outcomes were being likely to be achieved by the strategy. So in effect, how the success of that strategy could be gauged. So since that time, we have undertaken a comprehensive consultation, the details of which are contained in some detail within the report. The report also highlights those pieces of work that have also reported or come to fruition since October, between October and now, which include the approval of the council plan, the strategic needs assessment consultation, and the outcome of the resident survey results, as well as a key piece of work that we undertook to estimate the number of rough sleepers in the borough, which was of particular relevance to this draft housing and homelessness strategy. So the methodology and the results of the consultation are set out in some detail. Don't propose to go through those, but they are set out for you. But the main conclusions from the consultation that we gleaned from people responding to the consultation came into 4 main categories. Huge concern, unsurprisingly, about levels of delivery and the impact of any downturn in the levels of delivery. Concerns as well about welfare reform, unsurprisingly, given where we are in terms of the national programme of welfare reform being rolled out and the likely impact. Enormous interest from a range of partners around a desire to respond with us to some of these needs. The need for and desire to joint work on many of these key areas was absolutely apparent. And there were some clear indicators as well around issues around supported housing, the panel arrangements that we have in place, the need to clarify move-on arrangements for vulnerable people within supported housing. So consequently, there have been some revisions to the strategy from the document that you saw back in October. Those are set out for you in the report, primarily around linking this document firmly within the overall picture of strategies and the link to the council plan. Incorporating the impact of that consultation is set out in quite detailed form within the report and the strategy. We changed slightly the heading around the 3rd theme, which previously was around making best use of existing stock. We've broadened that heading to encompass making best use of existing resources. So it's not just about bricks and mortar, it's about all the resources that we have available to us. And the presentation of the document has changed quite significantly towards the end to pick up on the point that was made in relation to outcomes. So identifying clearly which outcomes we seek to meet, how we intend to do it, and how we're going to measure and track to make sure that that's happening. And also the document reflects that the H&E overview has a clear role in scrutinising the strategy, and that an annual report will come to the committee for its consideration. So moving forward, the committee is asked at this point to note the outcome of the consultation and the revisions to the strategy, and also that an annual review will come back for consideration in the summer. And from here, the strategy will progress to be recommended by the portfolio holder for adoption by full council in July. Thank you.
Thank you. The normal procedures questions to the officer now. Councillor James.
As you may have guessed, I've got quite a few, so you have to stop me and I'll come back when everyone else has a turn, several times, I guess. First question I've got is on page 6 of 7. 7.4.2 there it says ensuring support resources are available to as many vulnerable households as possible. What does that mean by that? Will there be waiting lists? Are there waiting lists at the moment? Because I understand there are. Is resources meeting need? Because supporting people has seen a reduction in the funding to the number of people that can be supported. If you could just explain that point first, please, in relation to demand and funding.
Resources are finite. There's not finite. Sorry, there's no way of getting away from that. So essentially, it's about prioritising what we've got, making best use of what we've got, and ensuring that we make much smarter use. Particularly in relation to supported housing, the emphasis will be on quicker throughputs. So making sure that those resources are available to people, to more people, as we ensure the throughput. You know, that the potential for staying in supported housing schemes for up to 2 years maximum, for as long as possible, and then move on at a sort of slower pace. We've really got to be a lot smarter in the way that we're dealing with those resources, and there's a lot of work that we've already started to do with the supported housing providers and those commissioned services to make sure that those discussions are happening right early on in the day. When people are being placed into supported housing now, it's rather than you come into supported housing and you stay here and then we think about move on is identified right from the moment people are accessing those services. So it's about a much smarter approach to the total resource that we've got available.
But is there, in relation to demand, is there greater need than there is, it'd be quite nice to know within this strategy some detail there around demand. Needs are changing, needs are more diverse because of the context within which we're working. Some schemes, some supported housing schemes have sat with waiting lists. Arguably, it's not appropriate to continue to work with for people to sit on a waiting list. So more work will be done with people around through floating support and outreach, where people can't access accommodation-based schemes. I don't have any figures on any waiting lists held by supporting people commissioned services. Maintaining a waiting list is not part and parcel necessarily of what those services do. It's based on prioritising on a regular basis and making sure resources are spread as widely as possible. The second question is around 7.43, and it talks about prioritised for local households. Could you explain, because throughout the report you're talking about local households, what you mean by that?
Interesting, this concept of local, because it could mean different things to different people, but I think what came back from many of our partners was that Basingstoke-and-Deane has been extremely successful in developing a good array of support services, and more successful than some of our neighbouring districts. So often that can operate as a magnet to people to come, particularly where you've got a direct access facility as well. There's a danger that can happen. So certainly one thing that we'll be looking to do when prioritising move on accommodation through the housing register is to ensure that people have a firm local connection, whether that's through employment or through ongoing residence before them going into supported housing. I don't think we're in a position to be operating as sub-regional supported housing centres for North Hampshire or with any sub-region. So it really is focusing on Basingstoke-and-Deane residents and ensuring that that those resources are prioritised accordingly. There's no set definition in terms of X number of years out of Y number of years, but because a homelessness definition may be different to a supported housing definition, because by its very nature, rough sleeping, for example, may be more fluid. So people might not have established connections, but it's making sure that we are not operating as sub-regional supported housing schemes primarily because our services are better than in other localities, to be blunt.
Before I move on to my next question, I think there was a couple of hands in relation to this. It might be worth. Can we just, because Caroline wants to come in on this point.
Councillor Waldridge?
Just to ask you to clarify that, Kate, because my understanding with supported housing was that because it's supporting people funded, supported housing schemes, you cannot operate a local connection policy easily with those supported housing schemes. So you can't stop them going to supported housing. I think the key thing here is having a reconnection policy to the area, where they have got a local connection. So I just thought that possibly needed clarifying to the committee. So if they're going to May Place, the key thing is they can go in there, but then after, the 12 weeks or whatever, they'll reconnect to another area, and likewise with the 2-year schemes. But yeah, if you could clarify.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct, but a firm reconnection policy that's consistently applied throughout the county hasn't yet been agreed, so we're very active in those discussions. Something we've always been very keen to impress as well, and that is put into action by May Place, is that where you have more than one referral presenting in front of you and only one room available, our expectation is that the room will go to a local person, and that has been the way of sort of operating for a number of years now. So there are no local connection boundaries, but supporting people funding is often only one of the revenue streams, and this is a very sensitive issue in lots of the localities, and that it's an issue that will be the subject of ongoing discussion.
James, did you want to continue?
Yeah. I just wanted to clarify on page 13 of 38 in relation to outcomes. No, that's the wrong one. Oh no, that is the figure, sorry. You talked about there being 8 rough sleepers now. Because the figure that I thought we received on the members' bulletin was 12. Was that, have I got that wrong, or is that, when you sent us out the...
Sorry, the appendix 1 on the report is the rough sleeping note that was sent out, and that's 8.
And of those, there's 6 named individuals identified that have complex needs. Because it doesn't refer to that as a target later on. And obviously I can imagine that could be a very, very difficult piece of work to get those accommodated. How are you going to, you say something in there, but could you give us more detail on how you're going to achieve that? Oh, sorry.
In terms of the target is to have nil rough sleeping, because it's not acceptable for any rough sleeping to be happening. In terms of the numbers that were identified, or the named individuals, since that rough sleeping count was undertaken, we've coordinated jointly with a number of agencies, including drug and alcohol mental health teams, a cross-agency, almost sort of task force approach, case conferencing these really complex individuals. Those meetings are happening monthly, and already we're identifying some progress. So the people who have traditionally been very difficult to engage are now engaging with the key support services. That's a start. It won't necessarily be the end, possibly for some time, but this will be a journey for them. And I'm quite confident that journey has started for a lot of those really complex individuals. Each outcome will be individually tailored. For some, it will mean going back through the supported housing route. For others, it may mean negotiating a bespoke arrangement with an RSL for an independent tenancy to be provided, and the care sort of then being almost sort of enveloping around them. So each case is being progressed individually. It will take time, But the approach to rough sleepers is twofold. The first is around dealing with these entrenched sleepers, rough sleepers, and secondly, to stop anyone who's at risk of becoming entrenched then falling into that mould. So it's a two-pronged attack approach, really. And since that rough sleepers estimate, because we were surprised at the level of increase, there's been a lot of activity with partners, with the voluntary sector and the Camrose Centre. So we are making some headway with that.
And in relation to the no second night, my question is around, if you're saying we can't be sub-regional, how are May Place going to be able to pick up that second night? Will they have capacity? If that is, we will not have a second night. In relation to what we've got available, I don't know how we're going to achieve that no second night with those resources.
I think the no second night out refers to an approach and a proportionate approach for the scale of the issue and the level of resources that you've got available. So our response would be around making sure that contact is made as soon as a rough sleeper is identified, to make sure that they're signed up to the necessary support. That may well involve accessing a direct access hostel initially, not necessarily within the borough, if that's appropriate. So it may well mean a night shelter, Winchester Night Shelter or others within outside of the county. But what is absolutely clear is that from the minute that person is hooked up into the services, that we have a pathway identified which will bring them back into the borough, the reconnection that we've spoken about. So it's a response that may mean a no second night out bed of being available, not within the borough, but the long-term plan will be for them to return through the supported housing mechanisms.
But you're confident that you could, that where it says no second night, it will be that they actually will be off the street on the second night.
We're confident that we can make an offer, whether or not that's an offer that's acceptable, but that's what we are striving to achieve. And there's been a lot of activities around making the crash facilities, improved crash facilities, particularly for cold weather arrangements. We've successfully bid for sub-regional funding to top up the floating support services to make sure that it's a more specialised service that will be able to respond out of hours during the night and after midnight if necessary to some of the rough sleepers as notifications come through. So once we've got that entire package of services networked out, we'll map it out, and we're quite happy to circulate that for members' information.
Round of it, 'cause I have a list here. Councillor Round.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, some fairly simple questions. Well, again, on the outcomes, when I read the report, we talked about an estimated figure of 3, and then finding that it was an actual of 6/8. And I couldn't see what was the sort of timescale. Was there suddenly we changed them from 3 to 6? So was that over a fairly long period in terms of the estimated and the actual?
It's an annual it's an annual estimate that's undertaken, and so the 3 would have been 12 months previously, and the 8 would have been last November.
Thanks for that. But we're saying that the new account is probably a far more better or more accurate way of doing it.
There has been an increase, particularly of well-known complex needs individuals. Possibly within that year they've just run out of chances within some of the supported housing schemes. Most of them have been through supported housing and through May Place as well. So at that particular point in time, on that particular night, the estimate through through all agencies involved in the work was that there were 6 known, with potentially 2 estimated on top.
Thank you. And none of those were falling into category of use?
From my knowledge about the individuals, youths being under 18, I think these were more sort of males and females in their 20s, 30s. But I couldn't promise that. I will check that out.
Thank you. On the no second night out, second paragraph, so it's page 14 of 38, I was interested and noted that you're sort of working with neighbouring counties, all in Hampshire, not picking on maybe Berkshire and Reading, which I would have thought been useful for you to know what's happening in Berkshire and Reading because it's close to some of us.
That particular sub-regional group has been brought together by CLG, that's given a particular pot of money to the North Hampshire authorities. All of that work is then coordinated across the South East through a South East Homelessness Forum. So on a broader level, that engagement is happening. It's just that the regular bi-monthly meetings are held with our immediate neighbouring authorities, the North Hampshire authorities, primarily around, as I say, the money that we've been given and that we'll be successfully using in Basingstoke and Deane.
Thank you. And lastly, on page 20 of 38, can I just confirm that when you're using the terminology of bedroom tax, you're using language that perhaps people that responded to you are using, and that's not going to be an adopted category by this council?
It's direct feedback from the consultation.
Councillor Peach. Right, we'll go back to Councillor James if you want to do one or two more. Or Councillor Waldridge, okay. Councillor. I've still 6 speakers here.
Okay,
Right,
I've got lots more, but I'll keep going.
Hang on, sorry, I'll go down the list then. Councillor Tucker.
On the scope, on the first page, the 4th line, the word maintain, I find it could be read to be something else, I think, other than what you're suggesting. It says a home of a good standard which they can afford and able to maintain. I'm sure you don't mean literally bricks and mortar type maintaining. Yeah, I mean something else, but that certainly isn't quite right, I don't think. Thank you.
We can use the phrase sustain.
Thank you. Councillor Tilbury. Sorry, if you're happy, Councillor Harvey now.
The only reason I just question the use of the word maintain is that many residents do actually physically maintain the property with redecoration and so on, that they don't get support from others. So I appreciate what Councillor Tucker is saying, but maybe the use of the word maintain does have relevance to some residents. That's the only reason I raise it. I appreciate what you're saying.
Should we say sustain and maintain?
Is everybody happy if we sustain and maintain? Yeah? Right, okay, Councillor Tilbury.
Okay, on page 19 of 38, it's an old favourite, the RSLs to offer financial incentive packages for downsizing tenants. So CAB can effectively advise on this area. Well, the obvious is whether we're aware of it, but do we know how many actually still do that? Because obviously a lot of them did, certainly Kingfisher did, and you know, it's one of the things that we used to do. They stopped doing it, they're saying it's not worthwhile, but I think it's probably got more. That, yeah, don't mention the bedroom tax, but that it's obviously it's one of those things that may help. You know, well, I mean, obviously they all stopped doing it to save money years ago, but I mean, it may be worth their while. But do we know how many do it has?
We do know that they have policies to assist now in light of welfare reform. The exact detail of how many and to what extent, I think they're looking at individually tailored packages for each tenant, but we do know that both Sovereign and Sentinel and Affinity Sutton in some instances are prepared to offer some assistance. Because the assistance can vary across landlord, the advice that we give tenants is to initially, in the first instance, speak to their own particular landlord to see what's on offer and what's available.
Yeah, I think the point whether we could know which ones do that, because often tenants come to us in the first instance to say, you know, what can I do, and point them in there, because often it isn't something that would occur to them to ask, and a lot of them don't speak to the landlord, and except as a last resort, because they're afraid they're going to throw them out their house. A lot of them, but some very odd ideas, whether they will speak to councillors to get a bit of a feel for it. So if we know, we can point them in that direction, send them along.
Mr. James, did you want to come on?
Just picking up on that point is that in relation to some housing associations, they're also giving different people within the housing associations are giving different advice, and I'm not sure there is a consistent approach from a housing association. And I think we need to know that, and it really, I guess, it forms part of the tenancy strategy, and it's something that we should require as part of that strategy, that we ought to know that sort of information.
We are doing what we can to coordinate the information across partners, bearing in mind we have over 20 housing associations in the borough, and bearing in mind as well that we have no monitoring role over housing associations. So this is very much, us asking them to give us information, and we'll forward it on. We've coordinated a lot of information from some of the small bit landlords. That's been quite difficult to obtain, but what we can do is make a members information pack available and send that round to all members.
Coming back on that, and I understand you won't be able to do it for all of them, but for those key partners where we've actually, for example, given them land at nil value or other, there are incentives, I would expect those key partners to be able to give us that information. And if not, when we're looking at any of those issues around delivering opportunities to these partners, we would need to reflect on if they can't give us that information.
Sorry, I've misinterpreted. They will always give us information. It's whether they will deliver what we expect them to deliver for their tenants, and a consistent service. So yeah, we will certainly get the information, have no problem getting that.
Thank you. Councillor Waldridge?
Just a request, when you do that, Kate, could you also try and find out, or you may know off the top of your head, what the local assistance policy is now in terms of the new, the policy here that's replaced budgeting loans and crisis loans? Yeah, there were, because I know each area's got different ones, and I'm not sure what it is in this area, and it'd be helpful to know because I had a query from a resident the other day. So it all very much fits into this as to what might be available to help somebody move.
The county council now holds that pot, and the county council has a support approach which we can make available, and a telephone helpline as well, which clarifies exactly what assistance is available, and we can circulate that for members as well.
I'm going down the list. Councillor Reid.
Thank you. Kate, page 9 of 38, 5.3, the resident survey. The last bullet point, providing homes for local people, clearly identified as the most important council activity in relation to supporting the local economy by all respondents, basically. And I know you've already made a sort of response to this in reply to Councillor James, and that was particularly in respect to supporting housing. But thinking about our register, the housing register, could we consider some sort of local qualification period?
Absolutely. The legislation has changed, which will give us that flexibility, and that will be coming back to the committee for consideration in terms of how far it wants to take that approach. And we do intend setting up a members' workshop in the summer so we can start teasing out some of those issues to see how far members want to take that. It is a very real issue to members, either from a borough perspective or within some of the parishes as well.
Thank you. That's really encouraging. So now we have the ability in law to do that. We're happy to start looking at that.
There will always be caveats, so a ridiculous policy wouldn't necessarily. Well, we could try, but certainly the constraints were quite significant previously because it was quite prescribed, and the definition was also set down within legislation. So we do now have capacity. What we do need to understand is what local means, and what do we mean by local, and what's the definition of local, and what does employment mean, and what constitutes employment. All those issues definitely need to be teased out.
Councillor Waldridge, you're next on the list. Did you want to speak?
Okay, yeah, I've got a few questions here. I'll try to pick the most important ones out. First one, you sort of listed here the sort of people you've consulted with in this round of consultation that you've done, which, you know, generally is quite comprehensive, but I just wondered why the rent tenants haven't been consulted. Was that just, you know, because that's quite an important group, and I think for me, what's still lacking in one of the things that's still lacking in this strategy is the focus on the private rent sector, because it is an ever increasing sector everywhere nationally, you know, and Basingstoke as much as it is elsewhere, and you know, particularly in terms of the standard of private rent, but also, you know, so I just feel that group was possibly missed out on the consultation. But just a comment, really. Did you try, or was it just? Sorry.
Not as a specific group, given that the general sort of information and promotion about the consultation was done generically through Twitter and through the website, and some of the comments I recall sounded as if they were from people in private. There were some issues around private tenancies expressed there. And obviously we had a staff workshop, so that included our private sector specialists within that, so our rent bond officers. So
question, I'll go back to the second night out stuff that Laura was talking about earlier. Previously, when you were mentioning this, I know it's still an ongoing piece of work, I do appreciate that, but I think there was some talk of deposits or a bond coming out for single people, and I just wondered whether we got any further update on that, because that's not mentioned in the report, and you know how soon it may be that we get some sort of information on that if it's not yet available. Oh,
I'm hopeful that we will know more on that by the end of this month, because we're just finalising the arrangements to access the sub-regional funding. But essentially there will be a pot of money called personalisation money, which will be attached to the work that's done with single people with complex needs, potential rough sleepers. The proposals that are out for use of the Community Support Fund can include assistance accessing private rent for some single people. There is no recommendation for a generic single person's rent deposit scheme for every sort of single person. It tends to be focused and prioritised on those either with support needs at risk of becoming rough sleepers, or who within supported housing schemes and want to move out.
One further one at the moment is this, you know, quite a lot of criticism, I have to say, of the supported housing panels and the way they're operating here, which I was really quite surprised at, given obviously my, you know, it's a long time since I've done that job, but you know, certainly at that time I would have been very alarmed if I had seen some of the criticism that was here in this report. One of the things that it mentioned was the fact that doesn't seem to be a single person you know, or tenants certainly aren't aware of a single person promoting the panels, you know, the supportive housing now. But is there still a one individual who's leading on that? Because my understanding was that there was. So, yeah, okay. No, it's just one of the comments that came out here, which I was really surprised at. Cause, yeah. Okay.
Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Chairman. In no particular order, I've got 4 questions. Would you like them one at a time and get easiest? The first relates to our target for empty homes, bringing empty homes back into use. And I'm sorry, it's quite difficult for me with my left hand to make sensible notes and things on papers, so forgive me for not remembering which paragraph that is. 10 long-term empty homes on page 34 or 38. Could you It would be useful just to know how that fits in if we could be reminded how that compares to our expectations for this year and for last year. You know, so is this a stretch target or a comfortable target? Or
I don't think you can have any comfortable targets in respect of empty homes. It's a minimum target. So the expectation is that we will bring as many long-term empty properties back into use as possible, with a minimum being 10.
So what I was trying to get at is, can we be reminded what our average in recent years number of empty homes per year that we've brought back into use is?
A written answer on that if you're looking at it in recent years, because there's different ways of looking at that, whether that's as a result of our intervention or whether we're looking at the number of empty homes that are that are returned from a baseline position from CLG. So I'm not giving you misleading information. I'd rather take that away and get you a written answer.
That then prompts another question, because if there are different ways of measuring it, which is the way that it will be measured in here? So if there is doubt on that, perhaps that needs to be tightened up. Right, then if I go on to question 2, which is about resources and about, we've several times already, and it's repeated in the report, use the phrase that it's essential that we don't simply talk about new stock as being, but actually using all resources. And I'm just wondering whether everyone who reads the strategy will understand which resources those might be, because there is a paragraph in saying how we are funding the strategy. Now, is that the same as the resources? No, I don't think it is at all, but do we actually need to have more clarity in terms of exactly what resources we're referring to?
On page 5 of the strategy, which would be your page, some boxes, your page 6, resources are finite. I mean, we could look at defining within there that we mean capital, revenue, as well as bricks and mortar resources. I mean, it's resources in quite a generic sense.
Then if I read that as whether as a general member of the public, would I take that to mean, well, hang on, I've seen somewhere else that the council has got however many hundred and whatever million pounds in the bank? So is that part of those resources? See what I mean? That it's capable of leading anyone to think, well, that means the entire resources of the council. But clearly it can't, so I don't know whether there's any way of giving some clarity to that.
Okay. I think, I mean, in terms of making use of existing resources in order to meet strategic objectives, so we make use of the range of resources, staff resources, partners resources, sort of community resources, if you like. Whereas the funding section, it may well be that we review the heading, funding the strategy. This is the resource that the council has specifically earmarked in order to help deliver the strategy. Maybe I can make that clearer.
And at the risk of making it more wordy, perhaps in that box on page 6 of the strategy, the words that you just used about the council's resources and partners' resources and community resources might actually be put in there in brackets, just to help readers. Thank you. And probably being picky. Measuring success, this is page 11 of the actual strategy, which I think is about page 35 of 38. For example, supporting vulnerable people, priority 5, and how we'll measure success. Monitoring and reviewing impact, monitoring. Well, a pedant might say, okay, so if we've monitored and reviewed the impact of supported housing panels, that means success, even if what we've found out isn't what we hoped we'd find out. Monitoring welfare and support assessment. Are those really smart enough?
I think the difficulty is that if you look at 2 pages ahead of that, under the first heading, how will we measure success, we go on to explain what performance targets and other evidence data will we use. So it's not the activity of monitoring in itself. It's using the evidence from that monitoring to make a judgment on whether or not we've succeeded. So I think to replicate that explanation for each heading when it appears on a new page might assist.
Well, it might do, but what is the target? It is capable of being read as the target is to monitor. But I don't think that is the target. I think what you're hoping to see is a positive impact of the work we're doing.
It's the outcome that will change.
Yes.
And we will evidence it either through... We'll evidence the outcome either through measuring targets or through analysing other data which we use to inform those outcomes. So if that makes sense.
Yes, so it is the outcomes and the targets, not the monitoring.
Yes.
So I think perhaps that needs just to be slightly rephrased.
Councillor James?
We also have real concerns about that section of the report and how we're going to measure success. And if these reports are going to come back to us on an annual basis, we need to know this is what we will achieve, and we need to know as members how we've achieved that. If I can just go through some of those, I mean, I'm concerned, as was already raised, at the target of just 10 long-term empty homes, when historically we've had a much higher number, and we now have a dedicated officer. That is a mean target, really, in considering how many we have are empty. But in relation to that whole section of how we will measure success, I don't think that should be in that section, the word monitor. That should be in the previous section, but in there we should know as members, that when you come back in a year's time, we will be able to say to you, how have you actually, what was the performance in relation to this issue? On the one in relation to page 32 or 38, it says delivered target of at least 300 new affordable, and then it's changed this now from the draft strategy and from the question that I asked Tracy, is now says gross homes. So, for example, so you all know, this council is now going to require less houses to be built for affordable housing, because in Norden, we've just knocked down 90 units. So under this new target, it then will mean that we only have to deliver 210, which is a lower figure. And so in relation to housing need, that isn't what it said. And if you look at going back to the report last year, one of the recommendations in the report, the third recommendation, is the committee agrees to recommend to the portfolio holder for housing and regeneration that the annual target to deliver at least 300 affordable homes to be reaffirmed. And when I asked the question at that meeting and then got it answered by Tracy, it was net. And I was told that it was a net figure. So that is a reduction in the delivery of affordable housing. If you support this tonight, you are supporting something that is reducing the amount of affordable housing we are building. We're double counting. That's one of the points I wanted to raise. In relation to, Kate said that in relation to rough sleepers, there was a commitment of no rough sleepers, but in the actual how we're going to measure it, it says monitor annual rough sleepers estimates. Well, if we're going to say that our commitment is to no second night out, we should say the target is that nobody has a second night out. They're not good targets. They're very, very poor. Preventing potential homelessness and financial exclusion for households affected by welfare reforms. What does that mean? How are we going to measure that? Annual monitoring of the review of the DHP spend. What does that mean? And I could go on, but I think that's very poor, and I think that we need to, and I would like to recommend an additional recommendation that is looked at before it goes back. The Cabinet then makes some changes to this, because I can't support something that's going to build less affordable housing, for start, and it definitely is going to do that. And I can't support something that isn't going to be able to be measured and isn't smart, as Paula has said.
Councillor Baker, had you finished?
I had one more.
Carry on, please.
I don't know whether I wanted to respond to what Laura was just saying.
Only to reiterate that the intention of how we're going to measure success is not in just listing a lot of either targets or numerical outputs. Some outputs do have a place, and certainly in terms of the number of new affordable homes produced, that would be one. But essentially, the main strategic objective will be to reach intended outcomes, and some of that information, some of the monitoring data and information will be used to inform the extent to which we are meeting those outcomes and what activities within those we will be achieving it. So, for example, making best use of resources, we will review the allocations policy. That will be a clear intended achievement within the lifetime of this strategy. And the target on rough sleeping isn't just to carry out a monitoring exercise. The target is to have no rough sleeping. That is clear. That when you have an outcome of ensuring vulnerable people are able to access and keep accommodation which meets their needs, that includes having no rough sleeping in the borough.
Could I just come up back? But you haven't answered the question, as Paula said. This is fundamentally changing. If you look at the independent report that we just received in P&I about need and all of what they've looked at housing need, this is now saying our housing strategy is saying that we are only going to deliver 300 gross. Why is that changed? That is now means in Norden you've just knocked down 90 units, so this year you're only going to build 210. Just so you're aware, all of you, that this is, if we're going to have regeneration as a key priority, which you're all saying it is, if we knock down 280 units over the next year, does that mean that we're only going to build 20 units?
If I could come in here, I've just queried whether this gross is a mistake or not. I'm just trying to clarify. It's not a mistake. Can we note what you said? Because I do remember there was a query, not quite sure which meeting, but you did query net or gross at a previous meeting.
And I had a verbal, because I didn't get the answer that I wanted. Tracy gave me, yeah. But also, but regardless of the answer you gave me, Tracy, what I want to be really clear of, politically, you have moved away from delivering 300 units. And not you, but the cabinet member, and I want to be clear from the cabinet member, maybe he can come forward. Can you come forward to answer that question? Because that's a change, and I just would like to be very clear on what's happening politically, because I couldn't possibly support this.
I welcome a cabinet member to say a few words.
Yeah, as far as I'm aware, it's not intended to be a change, and it may well be that gross shouldn't be there, and we will check it out. It certainly wasn't intended to be a change. I think that's... If it was intended to be a change, it wasn't one I was aware of. So as far as I'm concerned, it wasn't intended to be a change. I'm just saying, as far as there has been absolutely no discussion of any intention to change the target. It was meant to recreate the existing target and carry it forward.
Thank you.
In that case, it needs to be net if it's to recreate what we had before.
Because we don't have the information, the point's been well made, the cabinet members mentioned it, it's recorded, so hopefully we can actually deal with that later. So, yeah.
In terms of the corporate performance monitoring information, both figures are actually recorded, so you can see the difference between what's actually been delivered and what was there before. So both figures and a breakdown of what type of accommodation within both of those figures is being used as corporate monitoring information. Right.
Councillor Baker.
My last point was the response to the consultation, looking at page 19 of 38, which in the table there's the statement, most clients ask for information on how the housing system works, who to see, waiting times, scope for additional priority. Now, that probably strikes a chord with everyone around the table who has dealt with casework with people who expressed exactly that sentiment. And I wondered whether thought had been given to other ways of providing information other than merely solely the not merely solely the Mayplace and Camrose.
Yeah, we've given quite a lot of thought to that, and it's also quite clear from our post bag as well that sometimes when we think we've explained things clearly to people, that they've gone away quite confused. There are a number of aspects to dealing with that. The first is looking at the housing allocations policy, because whilst it's the system that we've got is clearer than what it was before 2007, there's scope to make it even simpler, so it's even clearer, you know, the differentiation between bands and points and what have you. Choice-based lettings has made some inroads into the clarity and the transparency around vacancies and what have you, but arguably that we can go further with that. We have imported something called an enhanced housing options package, which a number of local authorities are using, which essentially is almost like a self-help supported mechanism where people can go through, input all their sort of circumstances, and they can get an individually tailorized outcome in terms of what their options are. And we've also been looking at the letters that we give people once they've come into our office and seen officers, trying to clarify that. It's an ongoing piece of work to try to refine and update and clarify, and use of all forms of media that are way beyond my age group in terms of, you know, some of the media that we use to communicate with our customers, constantly updating that, references to YouTube and Twitter, using Twitter as well to try and help clarify exactly you know, what options are and what the situation is.
found that very interesting. Thank you very much. And can we access that information?
With one hand. Certainly once enhanced housing options, what we didn't want to do is import a system and then just say, there it is, everyone, please click on and use it. So we want to roll it out in a way whereby any support agencies, advocates and CABs and agencies working with people and members as well can be sort of given a route through to see exactly how things like that work. So yes, certainly.
Councillor Harvey, please.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a few points to pick up, if that's okay. Can I talk, Kate, about the private sector, really, and just the element within the report that raises a number of concerns about that and the issues raised by the consultation to start with, really. On 16 of 38, we talk about the changes to the benefit system for under 35s will mean far less property being available to 16 to 18-year-olds. And then if you carry on through, I mean, there's referencing obviously to sofa surfacing, there's referencing to the issues that relate to accessing housing either through, obviously, off the register. If we go back to the old report, and I guess this picks up the point about statistics and the importance of the evidence, the old report commented that there were 1 in 7 of all general needs applicants on the housing register currently didn't have any accommodation at all. Now, what we've seen, I think what is really important, and I can't see anywhere in the report here where this is tackled at all, and it should be, and it needs to be a priority, and it needs to be properly evidenced and defined as terms of an outcome of dealing with the big increase in HMOs. Now, we've seen a significant increase in unregistered, unknown HMOs across our estate in a way that, as an authority, we're identifying them as caseworkers, ward members, and the authority has no idea that they exist, and you're going out and you're conducting work almost retrospectively, chasing our tails, if you like. Now, I appreciate the national legislation is the way that it is, but there are also mechanisms and such that we can use to address this issue. Now, I don't see anywhere in the strategy of where we actually acknowledge that it's a problem, acknowledge that it's a growing problem, and actually produce anything that says what we're going to do about it. And I'd like it to be in there. It might well be that you do, and it might well be that it's in other forms, in other parts, in other reports. But I do think it should be part of our strategy, so that it actually acknowledges, one, the growing problem it is, and second, what we're going to do about it. Particularly because, and it isn't just 18 to 28, it isn't just that age bracket, but it is that significantly, who are looking to HMOs because they can't afford the normal private rented sector anymore. They can't afford to just get a flat or a house in that section. So in that context, could you help me just to understand how we're going to pick this up here? And if not here, and I think it should be here, where else will we pick up on those issues?
Bearing in mind this is quite a concise document that tries to bring together a number of strands, specifically in relation to private sector and HMOs would be referenced under the private sector renewal, reviewing the private sector renewal strategy. In terms of the priority 3, making best use of resources, that's where that piece of work would happen.
See, this is the difficulty, though, isn't it? I appreciate you know what you mean by that, but as a member reading that, I don't know that you mean that, and I'm not a mind reader. And in that context, I think what we need, in all honesty, with all due respect, is a sense of, if we can, more explanation in that sense, so that when somebody, or a resident reads it, and somebody picks this up off the shelf, they're not having to interpret it or try and read into it things that I would never read that into necessarily what you just said there. So if we could be more explicit, I think it would be really, really important. And what I'm conscious of is if you go to page 6, and your point is there, using the private rented sector, accommodation will be key in doing this as effective partnership and sub-regional working. If we're going to use and need to see the private rented sector being used more significantly to soak up, to deal with the issues that are coming, then again, I put the question really, what are we going to do about the HMO issue that we face? Because I think there's a growing issue with a number of them that are going under the radar, that are involving poor landlords, very poor landlords, and the regulation and monitoring and actually the standards that we're seeing is a real concern, and it is particularly in terms of some of our estates and what we're seeing.
Mr. James?
so people understand, just in the last 2 weeks, we have seen two cases of families that are actually living in one room, and that's 4 people, and we've got 11 people in a house. And that isn't unusual at the moment. We're getting more and more cases coming forward like that, and it is a real issue. And all of the agencies are terribly concerned. And what we're concerned about is that some of the actions within this report are going to be pushing more people, particularly the action around supported housing. When it says it on, if I can just find it so you're aware of it. It says about, one of you can help me, Kate, where it says about that we're actually going to be requiring, I'll come back to it anyway and find it, but people that have been living in supported housing, so they're quite vulnerable people, been living in supported housing, but we're going to make sure that the private sector, and pushing them for the private sector, and what Kate has said tonight is that they're going to have to move more quickly out of that. Now, the only option for them, because under the benefit system, is a room, because they're under 35, most of them. And so that is into the HMO, but I can't tell you how horrendous the situation is. And one of the things that I would like this homeless strategy to pick up on, or the Labour group would like it to pick up on, is the rent deposit. I know that rent deposits aren't our responsibility, but people that are in this accommodation are having rent deposits taken from them illegally and being held illegally, and then they're not returning them. And so we need to understand, and I'm sure lots of you that don't live in urban areas won't realise how awful the situation is at the moment in relation to the housing standards. And this housing homeless strategy needs to reflect that trend, and we have rackmen within the borough that are actually really creating very horrendous situations for people who are vulnerable and exploiting them, and this needs to reflect that.
I think all I can do is reiterate what I said previously about how this is, as a strategic document and a high-level strategic document, sort of summarises where it fits with other strategies, one of which is the private sector renewal strategy. Now, some of those detailed actions that you're talking about not only are quite dynamic actions because they can change from one month to the next, but they're also reflected in the service delivery plans which sit underneath the work that this is doing. This strategy is an overarching framework which sets the direction of travel, so it won't necessarily document each and every activity that you're talking about within this document. It will just give the pointers, because arguably, you know, housing applicants on the register aren't going to go and pick up a copy of the housing strategy. They're going to access our website, they're going to come and speak to our officers, and that's what they're going to do when they look to see what services and assistance this council is offering to help them.
Can I just say, in relation to a partner, partners need to know that we have an Article 4 that says before anyone can actually get planning permission and convert a house into a house of multiple occupancy, they're required under some, depends on which wards, but in Labour wards they're required to get planning permission. Now, anyone, whatever the size of that HMO is, and that needs to be reflected, that strategic approach, and I want that in the strategy. But it's not planning, it's Article 4, so they know that that is required. It's not planning, but it's knowing that there is that link, and we need to cross over. We need that crossover.
I don't think the housing strategy is divorced from the Article 4 at all. It's where that is captured, and people, in terms of understanding the Article 4 approach, that is well documented on the council's website, which is where most people go where they're looking to find out the information around that. The fact that this housing strategy brings together and sits amongst other strategies, and that would be included within the private sector renewal strategy, is a point that I've already made.
Councillor Harvey.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Obviously, if this is a high-level document in the way you describe it, we can argue that in terms of what, as the Labour group, I'm sure others may want it to be. But the point is, you've got issues here that you've highlighted. empty homes, social housing, all the other bits, a reference to the issue that is growing in the context of HMOs would not go amiss in our high-level document. So pick it up, and at least we could then, as members, hold the authority to account the right way through audit and through all the other mechanisms that are there at the right time for it being the issue that it is to our residents. So, and I don't know whether the Cabinet member would be willing just to give an undertaking to reconsider that a line in here that refers to the HMOs would not go amiss.
May well have your wish come true.
At the risk of being shot by officers, I am happy to consider putting a reference to HMOs in at the same high-level detail as the rest of it, because I do think they aren't reflected here, and it is a point well made. And on the, can I say on the targets while I'm here, I did say to committee last time, we are very happy to consider any specific targets that you want to suggest. We have picked up on all the specific targets that were suggested. So if there are any more specific targets that you want to suggest to us between now and when it goes to Cabinet, we will think about them. But I'm personally, having spent a lot of time in the civil service, having targets imposed upon us which merely distorted behaviour and led us to measuring things that you could measure and not things that mattered, I'm very opposed to having targets for the sake of it. So, we need to make it clearer that the monitoring is not the monitoring that's the end. The monitoring is a way of checking the quality of what is going on. But quality cannot always have a numerical target. So I'm very happy to consider, smarter targets where people can suggest them, but not targets for the sake of it, because I've had too much of that. And can I just, while I'm here, make one other point? Going right back to a very early comment, just to ask you to think about when you come to your conclusions that Councillor Mrs. Tucker made about the use of the word maintain. That sentence is intended to be a direct quote from the council plan. I believe it is an accurate quote from the council plan. If that's true, I would rather keep the same words in this and the council plan, else we're going to have to explain why they're different. If they both need explaining, we'll explain them both. But can I, encourage you when you do your comments to not to ask us to change it if it's an exact quote from the council plan, because I think that would be unhelpful.
Thank you. Can I just come back on, in terms of the qualitative and quantitative elements in the benchmarking bits? I think there are contributions that we would like to make to that. So in terms of timescale and you taking it through, can we take that offline? Because obviously you've got a timescale. We want to make a contribution to that, and we'd like to talk you through. That's okay.
Can I just ask officers, when will the Cabinet paper need to be finished by, just so we all know what we're working towards?
May.
I've got by then, not just reported to me.
If I can just raise two other points, and I don't know whether Councillor Golding's one, because they may be policy areas, Chair. Two other points I'll say them together so I get through them. In terms of what may be happening in relation to the changing structure and welfare and what residents may be doing, and we've had this with the housing associations. If, for example, somebody's taking in a lodger, and we're going down this road of where residents are changing the dynamic of their household in that construct, what I've not seen here, and in any policy yet, either from a housing association or from us, either in the tenancy strategy or in anything else, is the relationship with safeguarding and the relationship with how residents are being informed and supported to make that choice of whether they want to do it in the first place, or whether it should actually be the right thing for them to do in their circumstances. I do think it's an issue because obviously residents are going to be considering this in the new circumstances in the new world we're living in. And if there is no support, we might find ourselves in very difficult circumstances, casework-wise, where we are finding residents who have got lodgers, who have got rights, because they've obviously entered into a contract that may have other implications that we're not picking up. So I don't know where this would fit, but it's an issue to raise, risk in that sense. The second issue, a separate issue completely, and this relates to the tables at the back and the discretionary funds for disabled access and disabled support, disabled grants. The housing associations have been very clear to us they will not pick up the tab for any adaptations that need to be done for any properties that residents are having to downsize into. Now, if they're not willing to pay a penny towards that, will the grant be enough to cover all cases? If not, how are we going to do that? Would we give a guarantee to those residents that we will meet the costs if they are going to have to downsize? Because the Housing Association, particularly Sensible, have been quite adamant they won't touch it. They will not put the money there at all. They expect us as the Borough Council to stump up the money in those cases.
there's a number of issues there. In terms of a contract, where someone has a contract and they take in a lodger, a lodger in legal terms is only what's called an excluded licensee, so has extremely limited rights. So in terms of whether or not they're created, I'm not sure in the issue around safeguarding. Right. One thing that we did talk about at the last workshop in terms of questions to RSLs, because we can't necessarily answer on behalf of housing associations, is we did undertake to arrange another workshop. It may well be that the workshop we hold in the summer in relation to the allocations review can also involve the RSLs, and you can put some of these questions directly to them, because I wouldn't necessarily want to answer on their behalf. Question on DFGs?
Well, just quickly coming back on that one, I think, forgive me, that the point being that in some instances of casework that has come through recently, you've had vulnerable residents who have other vulnerable residents who are lodgers. So then you end up with two households who are both vulnerable living in one unit, and they may have to change due to circumstance. It's how we deal with that context of the individual case, but there's the broader policy point. There's nothing anywhere that anyone is talking about this issue. The RSL has got nothing to do with us. It's almost a case of leaving the residents to their own devices to look after their own interests, and some of these people are vulnerable. So the risk issue for me is an important one from a casework perspective. In terms of DFG, if the RSLs aren't willing to put the money up for doing it, particularly in downsizing, if a resident is having to move because obviously of the changes in welfare, then who's going to pay for that? Are we going to pay for that? But we've heard from Sentinel, as far as they're concerned, we ain't paying for it, it's the borough that's going to pay for it, and if they're not willing to pay for it, then it's just tough luck on the resident.
Someone has a statutory right to a disabled facilities grant. That's the local authority statutory duty, and it's governed by the framework of regulations depending on what their needs are and how suitable the property is. It's a very broad framework. So,
which means if somebody presents with a house that has adaptation done to it and they have to move, are you saying that they will get? Is there enough money in the pot, and will they get it in that sense if they're forced into that situation?
it's a mandatory grant, so the council has no basis on which to refuse necessarily. So.
Councillor Gavin James. Gavin.
I think the first point is an example of the advice that we need to give to tenants, and I hope officers will take that away, make sure it is a point that, to be honest, there hasn't been a lot of talk about lodgers generally, and there's been a great interest in it. But so we need to make sure that if we do give advice, that we are giving comprehensive advice. So I don't think it needs to go into strategy, but it's a point well made to take away as an action.
Okay.
Chair, if I help out actually with one of the last reports about the DFG, I sat on the map that looked at the £500,000 fund. And I think there was a clear view from that you couldn't have a policy that would touch everybody because there's so many individuals with individual needs. Each case would be looked at, and clearly if you're going to spend £1 million adapting a smaller property, it may be in those circumstances that the fund is used to help that person stay in their own home and not go through that process, because you've got to take a pragmatic view of these things, and I think that's pretty much what came out of that meeting. So I think that's where the officers go, and hopefully that answer will reassure people that that's the way it's going to work. In terms of questions, they're probably not going to change your strategy at all, but they just really might change my strategy in my head. The first one is looking at the needs and everything else that we have all sort of documented in here and what the returns of the survey said. Would you say that at the moment we have a problem in that we don't have enough supported living hostel kind of places, YMCA for older people, YMCAs at all, is May Place big enough, and that is where there is a problem? Or would you say actually the bigger problem is we have sufficient hostel spaces, but actually we've got a backlog? There are people that have all the skills to maintain their own tenancy, but we've got nowhere to move them on. Because if we understand where the problem is, where the biggest blockage is, it would help us in terms of, probably in other committees, how we deal with it. So that was the first question.
More likely the latter.
Because that obviously gets onto the survey itself, and building on Paul's point, and I have to say I agree with Paul, but please don't tell anyone outside this room, because because both Paul and I will both deny it. The survey returns come back and said, and I can't remember where it is now because I've lost it. Here it is on page 17 of 38, the second bullet point. developing more appropriate homes, fewer flats and more houses and bungalows. It's very clear from the HMO situation that we're talking about a lot of single people or couples and not necessarily large families. Now HMOs always is my first home. I left home I was invited to leave home. Shall we say? I lived in a HMO in 1989. 18th birthday present. So you know they've been around for a long time, but back then they were quite rare, quite unusual, and it made sense that you'd leave home, you'd live in one of those whilst your career builds up, and you get a bit of money together, and then you move on to your own property as we all do. It's a starting point, and all too often it's become now a stuck point because you can't really get out of it, and that's why we've had this explosion. So if you're saying that the blockage in the system is one-bedroom properties, and certainly as we go through this welfare changes, the smaller properties are a problem. We've got a survey responder who said, or possibly several comments made, that we need fewer flats and more houses and bungalows. I agree with the bungalows, but ageing population, we'd probably get a lot more three-bedroom family houses cleared out and people happy to downsize and move if you had decent bungalows for the elderly to move into. They'd love it. But actually fewer flats, the reality is, we do need the flats. But obviously that's not getting out there somehow, because even people who are, I mean, the key findings from 35 people, 26 of which were individuals who are in housing need, and 9 groups of people that deal with people in housing need or housing associations, somewhere along there they think we don't need flats, we need big houses. But would you say that actually small houses would be a better solution to our problem than, you know, would that help more affordable small flats and houses?
I think we need a range of accommodation types, but to dismiss the prospect of having any more flats, I think would be unrealistic and probably quite short-sighted, because flats do have a place. It's where you build them and in what density and how they're managed, which is probably key.
Because the next point is, throughout this, and it always bothers me, we talk about finite resources, and we've got a couple of quid in the bank. The Tories won't let you know, but I'll let you know. I've read the papers. The new homes bonus, obviously, was generated by homes, for homes, and there's obviously some money that we've got from selling council houses specifically for housing. So to keep going on with this, we have finite resources. It's only if we choose to have finite resources. We can choose to have a lot more resources if we want to. And it seems from what is being suggested is actually if we spent a lot more on affordable homes, yes, looking at one-bedroom flats and two-bedroom flats as a large body of single people make up most of our people on the housing needs register, actually we'd go some way to having something more powerful than any strategy is ever going to deliver.
Councillor Mrs. Waldridge.
Thank you. I'll try and limit it to one more question. Page 21 and 38, there's a comment there about youth homelessness. Yeah, concern over rising numbers in youth homelessness. That was part of the consultation responses. And then in the column next door to that, it mentions about it was going to be included in the delivery plan to monitor the youth service drop-in to ensure it provides effective services to young people. Now, I can't see that in the delivery plan, so it's there, and I think there's a few bits that are in this consultation responses, but they don't get followed through. So, sorry, yeah, this thing at the end.
Microphone and.
But that's not being followed through anywhere. So I'm wondering when that's going to happen and how it's going to happen. Thanks.
The delivery plan relates to the detailed service plan. Okay, and it is there in the detailed service plan. So those drop-in sessions are happening. And they're being monitored, and they're happening in conjunction with the youth service and children's services. So, but it's not reflected in the overarching document that you have here.
Just a supplementary on that, what are the findings finding? What are you finding with that monitoring that's going on about youth homelessness? Has there been an increase, and you know, how is that drop-in working? Thanks.
No, there hasn't been an increase in youth homelessness. We've maintained the record of keeping all 18-year-olds out of bed and breakfast. We've made no placement. We've continued and secured the supported lodging scheme, and the drop-ins are working really well, because if you've got a regular drop-in happening on a weekly basis, you don't have crises as often as you might if you have absolutely no service whatsoever. So the anecdotal evidence so far is that they're working really, really well, and we're really pleased with them, as are our partners.
Thank you. Councillor James.
Just picking up on the point that I raised earlier on, on page 1 of Appendix 3, it says specific targets around reviewing access to supported accommodation and hostels and freeing up vacancies via improved move on. Then it goes on page 3 to say clients living in supported accommodation are not considering the private rented sector as move on, and insert task in delivery plan to review move on and ensure private rented accommodation becomes a key part of the plan. My concern is that we're going to be placing very vulnerable people or vulnerable people that have lived in supported housing into the private sector, and I don't think that we have the support in the private sector to do that, and predominantly it's going to mean rooms. They're going to be living in rooms because that's all that the benefit system will allow them if they are on benefits. So I do have concerns about that.
That supported housing also refers to the Joshua Tree, which includes families. And families we wouldn't be placing into shared accommodation. Any placement that's made as an offer of move on, it's always been in the policy that move on has to initially consider private rented accommodation. It's just we've had sufficient social housing not to have to go down that route previously. So it's just actually all that is reflecting is the fact that we'll need to now. We would not make a placement or define somewhere as suitable that would place any vulnerable person at risk of exploitation, either from landlords or from other residents. We would not do that, particularly we wouldn't.
In relation to the page 26 of 38, it talks about welfare reform, the introduction of the universal credit in 2013 and other welfare reforms. Can you tell us, do we know when we will be introducing universal credits? No. For the record, Tracy's just nodded. No. She said no. Okay. And the other point I wanted to pick up here is that my concern is in relation to what was in the draft report, lots of the things that we said that we would do and that were in the draft report aren't in this report. And I just wondered if because members won't be aware, not all members will be aware of what's not in and what is in. Is it possible for you to go through them? I've got them here, but I mean, because there are lots of things that you've taken out that we will do, that we're not going to do this time round, and I just wondered why one of them, for example, review the procurement arrangements for bed and breakfast. That's not in this one now. Has it? Okay. And sorry.
It was the piece of work to identify more establishments within the town. You recall the discussion we had at Overview, was it July last year, when we took that Ways in Action. So that's already been completely worked with the commissioning team. Piece of work was undertaken, and we've got an extended list of establishments within the town that we can now use.
Concern is, in relation to the piece of work that I asked just recently of you, Kate, is that in the last year we've seen a 200% increase in bed and breakfast, and placements outside the borough have doubled in the last year. So in a sense, and the number of days spent in bed and breakfast in the last year was more than the last previous 4 years put together. So I'm not so sure it has been done, or if it has, we need to look at it again. And I have grave concerns if you look at and you wouldn't have seen this, but there's a table of each year of people in bed and breakfast, If you haven't seen it, maybe it's worth Kate sending it to everybody. But it is quite concerning, and so, I would like, that's just one example, I would like that back in to look at, because we're still sending lots of people outside of the borough, and that trend is growing in relation to bed and breakfast. So we need to think, and what our motion was about to full council was that we may have to think differently about even setting up our own bed and breakfast or funding a bed and breakfast, because the issue is becoming, I know that historically we've always been about prevention, but because there's an issue, we may have to look at this administration funding bed and breakfast in a different way.
The piece of work that we undertook to do was done. It did result in an increase in establishments. Our search for accommodation within the town when we need to happens on a daily basis. So it is an ongoing piece of work, but all I can do at this stage is note your comments. We'll pick the comments up with the portfolio holder after the committee meeting.
Rob, I don't know if you would would come forward so we can talk about it, I don't know, politically, rather than me putting the officers in a difficult position. So the email that I received from Kate says that the bed and breakfast, and what we look at in relation to the table, is the bed and breakfast has increased by 200% in the last year, and placements outside the borough have doubled in the last year. And know that piece of work is done, but it is a growing trend. What can we do about that?
I mean, there's two issues. To the extent to which there are people who, as part of our deed of homelessness, need to be put in bed and breakfast temporarily because there isn't longer term accommodation for them to move into. Now that is a demand that's coming from outside. So I'd much rather we were putting them in bed and breakfast than doing nothing for them, because that, so to that extent it's a measure of an increased workload, not a measure of failure in any sense. We want to keep the numbers who have to be outside the borough to a minimum, while recognising that in some places, particularly if people don't have children and don't have jobs, it may actually suit them, that may be their choice to be somewhere outside the borough rather than in the borough. But I do know the work has been done, and I think off the top of my head we had 3 establishments that we could choose from before, and it's now either 8 or 11. I can never remember whether it's gone up by 8 or gone up to 8, but it's a major increase. So we're in a lot better position than we were, and so that the numbers having to be in bed and breakfast outside the borough should go down. Is he optimistic? No, I think that they should, because we've got a lot more choice within the borough now. You've raised the point. Officers have done the work. We do have a lot more scope now than we had. So I would expect that to happen. We do occasionally ask ourselves the question as to whether we would like to run a bed and breakfast. So far we haven't convinced ourselves that would be a good use of the council's skills and resources, but we're in a very much a ruling nothing out situation. So next time we meet, we'll probably ask ourselves the question again.
Just to be clear, I mean, I just think that in relation to costs, and cost is not just financial, but this year, 12-13, there was 19 people outside of the borough. The year before there was 10, and I know that this is a growing trend. We've got more and more people in bed and breakfast. But after doing that piece of work, so maybe to reassure me, I could see the figures in the next quarter, and we could see them on a quarterly basis to see whether we do need to set up or fund or facilitate that process. Because I think that it's something that we shouldn't rule out, and I'm concerned that that was one of the things that we would do, and it's been, I know we reviewed it, but what we were saying as a Labour group is that procurement could be something quite different. And
I'm sure, because you could always ask and get them quarterly. We can offer them quarterly.
Again, the corporate monitoring that's going into performance panel each quarter does actually pick up on temporary accommodation and B&B placement, so that information will be going forward every quarter for review.
Make the point in relation to those households in bed and breakfast. the volume doesn't portray the rate at which bed and breakfast has to be used, in the sense that of those 38 families we placed last year, only 9 of them fitted the sort of picture, if you like, of people for whom accommodation options had run out, and we placed them in there until we could find something more settled. The majority, all the others, were either intentionally homeless or placed for 1 or 2 nights pending investigation. So there's always a context to an increase in figures. And yes, it was an increase, and it's the increase in volumes of placements that explains the use outside of the borough, rather than a failure of the exercise to find more accommodation within the town.
And on that point, the year before, the total number of days, this is 2011-12, the total number of days of bed and breakfast provided during the year was 211 days. And in 2012-13, the number of days bed and breakfast provided during the year was 653. So, and the number of days, so, I mean, placements in, so we can play with the figures, but so there is a massive trend, and we do need to look at this. And so I'm just concerned, that one particularly, because we felt very strongly about that as a Labour group, we need to look at. And I would like something back in this strategy that reflects that. But as you said, we can talk about targets, and maybe we can sort of look at that.
Councillors, we are at question time for the officer. But if there's no more questions, move to general discussion. I'll thank the Cabinet member for coming to the table just then. So we're on to general discussion now. Sir James.
Thank you. My concern about this strategy, as opposed to the last strategy, is lots of the substance of the strategy, and there's quite a lot of detail in the last document, valuable detail, that really should still be in here. And I'm concerned that a lot of that is now not in this document, and it's almost as if it's been cleansed of that detail. And I know it's not comfortable reading, and I know it's not easy to read that, but I would like to see that detail and that substance and that rationale for the decisions that have been made, because it is a high-level document, and it is an evidence-based document into this strategy. As we said, I still am concerned that there isn't anything here in relation to the private sector and some of those key areas. I know that we're going to have a private sector renewal strategy, but I think we need to make reference to some of the trends that are happening within the private sector. So I want to see within this document more of the evidence behind it as to why you made that decision. They were in the original document, and all of the tables were in there, but they've now been lifted from this. And I think that needs to go back in. In relation to the issue about standards, what's it called when you, housing, when we look at people's quality, the house that they live in, and the quality of the house. Is it housing? No, not housing standards. No, it's not, but I'll come back anyway, so I can't think what it is. But my concern is some of what we had in there has now been taken out in relation to those priorities. I'm also concerned that the evidence to support the document has now been taken out, and I would like to see that brought back in. But I welcome the opportunity with the portfolio holder now to come up with some smart targets. And the word that I was looking for was stock condition, and I would like something in this document about stock condition. And again, I don't think that it's in there, and I think particularly if we're talking about regeneration being a key priority of this borough, we need something that reflects stock condition, and it's not in there.
Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. Really, this is in response to Councillor James's points that she's raised. I think the portfolio holder has already suggested this is a high-level strategy document, so we don't have a mass of detail in there. But if I could just raise a point of clarification with the officers on this, is it not the case that several, if not many, of Councillor James' points are covered in the background evidence to this, and also in the strategy plan that you have as well?
I'd like to pick up the comment about the evidence base. As you remember from 6 months ago when we looked at the draft strategy, there was an appendix on the back of the strategy. That hasn't been removed, it hasn't been included in the report, but that doesn't mean to say it doesn't still exist. Given the extent of evidence to support a strategy like this, we are updating that information on a regular basis. Not all of the data that we've used comes out at a particular point in the year, so it's my job to update that on a rolling basis, which is what I'm doing. Secondly, the workshop on the 14th of February did present some more of the evidence base. The strategic housing market assessment, which I think is going to P&I committee at the beginning of June, is part of the evidence base. We said back in October that we had a shared evidence base with the housing strategy and the local plan, and that still stands. So the evidence base is present, it's relevant, and it's current, and it is available to scrutinise, as I say, the SHMA at P&I committee at the beginning of June, and the data that we put with the last strategy when it came here in October is still very much relevant.
Any other? Councillor Harvey?
Then I think it would be very helpful if we say that in the document. If we give the correct signposts to where we need to look for that, I think it would be very relevant. And in relation to P&I and the overlap between the two, I think it was interesting when we had the independent report that came back that Councillor Sherlock commissioned, and those two interesting people sat across the table from the committee and gave a very robust presentation. They very eloquently made the important link, I think, between the SHMA, the need assessment that they were doing, and the relevance of that to the work of both the housing department and policy. So the link that you're making, I think, is very relevant, and I'd like just to see the clarity of that in the front of the document, so that it's just there, it's transparent, it's open. We're not having to ask for it or search for it or look for it. It's there, and we know where to go to find it. I think that's relevant. Just to make a couple of other points, if I may, Chair. I think the issue with sometimes the issue with a high-level document, and is it always the catch between the two? Do you want it all full of everything, or do you want it to be so high-level that it becomes so abstract that you lose the point of it in the first place? And I think there's a real balance to strike here, and I just think the pendulum perhaps has swung a little bit too much to the abstract, and a little bit in that sense away from where perhaps the document could very beneficially be to all parties, ours as councillors and our partners. So maybe if we look again in future when we do this again, I think there's importance that we do take that on board. This doesn't tick all the boxes. I don't think the points that Councillor Baker has made have been necessarily addressed, and others have made in relation to the outcomes and the measuring. But we've had the portfolio holders' commitment on that. And if I can flip it round the other way, I guess the way I'm looking at it as well is if ARGA or Performance Panel or the corporate audit bodies are going to look at it, how will they hold it to account and how will they scrutinise it in such a way as we as councillors can say we've got a proper, decent health check of this, and that we are addressing the issues that have been raised in the consultation. If we can confidently do that, then we tick the box that the strategy is doing the right thing. At the moment, I don't think we can tick that box, so that doesn't necessarily say the strategy is in the right place. It isn't to say it's a bad document, the end of the world is nigh. What it's to say is it isn't getting us necessarily where we'd like to be. Just an opinion, just sharing a point of view from our perspective as the Labour group. In terms of where it goes with the SHMA, can I just quickly, in terms of that other evidence on a rolling basis, will this continue to be a living document? Because I think, sitting it on the shelf and allowing the housing strategy to gather dust is one thing. Having a document that's going to live and grow and change and develop is something else again. So going forward from here, say you pass this tonight, where does it come back? How do we deal with changing shape of policy and changing shape of the strategy over the next couple of years? Because that's going to be very relevant with all the changes that are coming through.
I'll ask the officer to come back to you.
Thank you, Chair. I've got just a number of points picking up on what Councillor Harvey has said. The SHMA is indeed part of the housing strategy evidence base. The work that Edge Analytics have been doing and are doing for us, which is going back to think P&I on the same date as the SHMA, if I'm right, that is also part of the same evidence base. It's not three different bits of work, it's all part of the same whole, including the Edge Analytics work. The SHMA picks up the housing needs assessment using a housing needs-led model. The work that Edge Analytics is doing will be looking at other ways of assessing housing need, for example, employment-led, workforce-led. In terms of monitoring and the point about this being a living document, as well as monitoring, as Kate has described already, against the outcomes, not necessarily based on specific targets, but measuring the outcomes, that work is ongoing. It will be very, very detailed. I'm also undertaking to monitor, to set up a past history of indicators for welfare reform and take that forward. And that will very much be a living piece of work. We can only go so far with facts and figures and numbers, so the experiences that you can bring to committee casework, the experiences that Nadine and Kate can bring in making these statistics real is going to be very, very important. And so, yes, it is very much dynamic. It's very much about this being a living document, and it's very much about ongoing monitoring, detailed monitoring, not just for the next 12 months, but well into the future.
Well, to finish off, Chair, I think the two things that are relevant there, obviously, I hear what you're saying and I understand where it's coming from, is where is the member input? In that sense, where do the members, and this is a positive, proper scrutiny, where do we properly look at that from a positive perspective, so that we can be assured, and this is not a criticism, I'm saying this in the context of just a proper audit, that the Housing Department is fit for purpose set against the strategy that we are choosing to adopt as members from a political and policy perspective. That has got to be done appropriately. You're doing the work, so where does that go to achieve that end, if you like, that the members get the sign-off and review of it and proper overview of it?
I think through existing structures, the housing strategy already explains what monitoring will be done, where it's being reported. Tracy's already mentioned performance panel. We're bringing the strategy back in 12 months' time. The strategic housing market assessment, the SHMA, is going to be done on a regular one-yearly basis, and in fact I'm already starting to lay the groundwork for yes. So all I can say is the housing strategy says where we're going to be monitoring the strategy. We're coming back here in a year's time anyway, and the SHMA will be done on a regular basis to sense check whether any of the trends, any of the variables have moved slightly, so that we can identify those very, very early. Some of the welfare reform monitoring will be done on a quarterly basis, and so we'll be able to discuss as officers and bring to committee any trends that we can see as early as possible.
Councillor Tilbury.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, one of the big issues in here is about maximising supply, and it actually says on here that as government funding for new delivery is falling, public bodies are expected to use their own resources to help deliver affordable housing, whereas what we're talking about is maybe helping a bit here and there, whereas I think what the government is really saying, start spending your money and build some houses, and I think that's what we've really got to do. And before I looked at this one, I actually looked at Winchester's housing strategy, and of course their housing strategy is to build 30 council houses a year. Now they're a fraction of the size of us. No, all right, they've still got council houses and we haven't, but that's the point. They're now able to borrow money to build houses, and they don't have £150 million in the bank. In fact, very few councils do. We have a load of money there, sat there doing nothing. It's earning no interest, and I've suggested in the past, and we got pretty much widespread support, well, from half the council, to use our own money to fund affordable housing. Whether we build them as council houses, let the housing associations rent them out, because I don't think we probably want to go back into managing them, or whether we just lend them the money. But there are all sorts of options to provide more housing. And at the moment, we've got a target of 300 affordable homes a year. Well, so gross, whether that's gross or net is another argument. Well, I think this year we're likely to provide 30. We'll be lucky if we see 300 houses built in the borough. We're sort of having this big argument about the housing numbers. And the reality is, in the next 5 years, we'll be lucky if we build 700 houses over that period at this rate, because it isn't going to get better for quite a long time. But the problem is we're now totally reliant on the private sector to provide affordable housing as part of larger sites or whatever. And with the lack of viability and all these arguments going forward, they're not going to be building them. So unless we build them ourselves, you know, we've really got, it's like a lot of these things, if you look at a lot of these problems, you've only got to go back to the past to see how it used to work. You know, and the argument is, oh, there isn't any money. And as I said before, if you go back to the 1950s, the government was building 200, councils with government money or whoever, were building 200,000 houses a year. Whereas we're now building, I think council housing at one point fell to 200 a year. But the housing associations have not picked up the slack. They were building 20,000 a year. But it's pretty obvious why there's a shortage of affordable housing in this country. We're not building any, it's as simple as that. The private sector isn't building houses that are affordable enough to people to buy, and that situation's just going to get worse. And we're really addressing that. We're really looking at how we deal with supporting homelessness, which is all very laudable and all that, but we're not addressing the real problem, which is get on and build some houses. And I think the government's given us a clear steer. They've scrapped the housing revenue account, which has freed up councils who still have council housing. Doesn't help us in that respect, but you know, we'd have the advantage that we've got the money we got from selling the council houses, sat there doing nothing. So let's get on and use it. Thank you, Chair. I think that's, you know, this is what our strategy should be, to be building houses. That's the only way you deal with the homeless problem.
Your point is well made, and you may have more sympathy for that point than before. But, Cabinet Member, do you wish to speak? Yes.
To that point, and to the point by Councillor Gavin James, and referring to Councillor Harvey's, I mean, this is in fairly general language, some of it, but the very first point under how we will achieve it on page 32 or 38 says adopting a partnership approach with selected preferred partners and considering potential use of other council resources, which means the money as well as the people, including land, just in case you didn't think we were talking about the land as well, to underline this approach. We are well aware that we're not going to get back to 300 without a considerable involvement by this council. I have had several meetings with the major housing associations as saying, what money would you like? And it's not money that's the problem. It's finding places to build at the moment. Once we've got the local plan sorted and we've got some agreed sites, then things can start and we can debate what we will do, you know, how we will use our land to promote that affordable housing, how we will use our resources. At the moment, the sticking point is the lack of available sites. And so there is no reluctance to put the money in if there is a suitable opportunity. But all the discussions so far, there's some fairly low-level opportunities that we're still working on in terms of possibly investing in existing houses and things like that. But the big changes will only come when we've got a plan and we know where we're going and where houses are going to be built. But also, for Councillor Tilbury's benefit, perhaps to mention, the third item down is supporting community-initiated interest towards opportunities appropriate for self-build, community land trusts and other community-based initiatives close to his heart, which he's mentioned several times and which we've picked up. So, you know, the intention is clearly there, and as soon as the practical opportunities are there, things will happen. But there are sticking points at the moment.
Councillor James?
On that point then, if there is an intention and a commitment, if under 106 developers are saying that a site isn't viable, so they can't deliver our 40% of affordable units, is there no reason why you couldn't then top that up to then deliver, so that that developer could deliver that? And then we've had examples that are going to DC and are continuing at the moment going to DC, where we could increase the amount of affordable just by you topping that up. So there are examples that we could deliver that now.
It is certainly something we would consider. We do not want to put out a big sign that says, oh, come along with your begging bowl and we'll pay for all the affordable housing. I mean, we are trying to do this in a way that doesn't miss opportunities, but equally doesn't gets best value for money for our taxpayers' money. So I am only aware of one case that we've discussed recently with a Section 106 issue, and we got quite close to resolving that point, and it didn't fall apart because of a lack of it fell apart not because of a lack of willingness on our side. If there are others, I think we'd better talk about them offline. But in general, it is quite clear we are willing to consider putting in money to help the appropriate proportion of affordable housing, where that would be provide value for money for council taxpayers.
Councillors, I believe we're close to winding up. Councillor James.
Just going on back on the points that I just want to be clear, because I wasn't absolutely clear in relation to what Paul was saying, is are we saying that the appendices in the draft report 1, 2 and 3, when this report goes forward to Cabinet in the old report, will be in that Cabinet report? I'm not sure. That's my first. What I was saying is the body of the report that came forward to us in September last year had a lot of, and I was told that their appendices, will it be accompanying the Cabinet report that goes in June? That's my first.
As far as the evidence base is concerned, which we looked at back in October, yes, with updated data. And the other documents that were with the report that came here 6 months ago, they will also be included with the Cabinet report.
Publicly available information. It's a case of where you replicate it, in what form, whether you put links to it, and certainly taken away the point that, you know, we've said in this strategy that the equalities impact assessment will be by way of a link, and there's no reason why that couldn't be linked in as well.
As I said, there is so much more substance within the draft of the report than there is in this one, and the rationale as to why you've made those decisions. And I think that's really important, and I would like to see that in the Cabinet report. And the other one is, I just want to be clear again as well, when you say that it will come back on an annual basis and we will review it, if, for example, we then decide that we need to have up our target from 300 to 500 affordable units, is that an opportunity that we then can change those targets, or is it not changeable? When we say review it, can we actually make changes to the targets? Or is this set in stone now for the life of the strategy?
It's a 5-year strategy. I don't think anyone could say that targets that you set in place in 2013 would need to stay fixed until 2018. The whole point of an annual review is that you monitor progress and sort of take any decisions based on that, based on what's in front. The issue probably with the target around affordable housing is not the target, it's around deliverability.
Okay, so I'll ask the officer to sum up the notes that we have here. And if there's something that's missed, please.
What I've got here is a list of information the officers have agreed to provide or changes that they've agreed to make to the document. So first up, we've got to check the ages of the 6 known rough sleepers and confirm the ages there. Information to members re the downsizing policies of our partners. The guidance pack on the welfare fund that's now administered by the County Council to be issued for members. The issue of sustain or maintain in the scoping of the document should reflect the same as the council plans terminology. The average number of empty homes returned, information of the averages over the last few years. There needs to be more clarity around the funding and resources statements, i.e. resources, exactly which resources are you talking about. The outcome and targets need to be rephrased and strengthened so as they're actually outcome-based targets rather than statements about what we're going to look at. The delivery target is confirmed as net per annum. There needs to be a reference to HMOs at a high level in the context of the rest of the document. Targets and benchmarking to be discussed outside of this meeting to give members an opportunity to input before it goes to Cabinet, and reference the P&I overlaps and the evidence base so as it's clear where those documents sit. That's all I have.
Is there anything that's missing from that list?
A further workshop to be arranged.
In which case I'll ask you to look at the beginning of paper B, 6 of 38, We have 2.1, 2.2 and 2.3 at the bottom of the page. 2.1 is the committee notes the outcome of the consultation on the housing and homeless strategy. We have noted it tonight. Agreed? 2.2, the committee notes revisions to the draft strategy. Yep, agreed. Thank you. And 2.3, the committee notes that an annual review of the strategy will be brought back to this committee, I believe. Well, yes, to this committee we're talking, for its consideration in the summer of 2014, which is a year, yes, year's time. Everybody agreed with that? Thank you very much. In which case, meeting's closed at 8:30. Thank you for all for turning up.